Louise, thank you so much. I'll wait until he's finished slamming doors.
Take two.
Take two. Louise, thank you so much for joining us on another You podcast. We are delighted to have you here. And I'm sorry, Paul, that I've missed the last two. You've missed me.
I've missed you, and I do not accept your apology.
Oh.
Why? That's a heartfelt apology.
Because you didn't bring your guitar.
Oh.
And you said you would bring your guitar.
Well, yeah, I didn't bring my guitar, but I brought water.
That's true.
Which is the source of life. And I brought Louise.
Yes.
A great guest.
I brought Louise. Now, Louise, you'll have a little moment in the spotlight to introduce yourself in a minute. But I'm really super excited about Louise because this is a moment where, or a podcast, full podcast, when we get to talk about something that I'm passionate about too, and that's children and young people.
Great.
Children, young people, and mental health, and also Louise is my pal.
Yep.
For her sins.
Yep.
And Louise also is the professional podcaster.
Oh my goodness.
Which is going to put us to shame.
I feel like professional's a stretch. I do a podcast. Some people listen to it.
Louise and I first met almost 2 years ago. Now, 2 years ago at Christmas time.
Oh, geez, it would have been, yeah.
Yeah. When we first worked for a Scottish mental health charity, working with children and young people. And we both don't work for that charity anymore. We're both going our separate ways into the field, but still working with children and young people. Louise, do you want to tell everybody who you are, what you do?
So my name's Louise. I have really quite a long history at this point in time in working with children and young people. I've worked all across I've worked in the third sector for 8 years now, and it's mostly always been with children and young people. I've worked with young people with learning disabilities and kind of neurodevelopmental disorders like autism, ADHD, things like that. I've worked with care experienced young people. I've worked with young people and families who are maybe kind of struggling financially and things like that. And kind of most recently I've moved more into the mental health realm in terms of working with young people and, teachers, carers, parents, staff, who are involved in young people's lives and kind of talking to them about mental health and kind of really spreading that word and kind of trying to break down that stigma that exists about mental health. So yeah, that's me.
That's you?
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, really broad history, really experienced. And when we first met almost 2 years ago, can't believe you're still working with me.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, can't believe you're still working.
Your sins, you're stuck with me.
Anything over a couple of months is a result.
We were working closely with schools. I know that's been a big part of your journey.
Yep.
And you're going to be continuing to work with schools and with frontline services in your new role. And particularly around self-harm.
Yep.
And that's a topic I would quite like to cover today. I read a statistic, and we were talking in the car coming here, that in 2019 the Scottish Government released some figures that in low areas of high areas of deprivation, that 15% of people were engaged in self-harm behaviours, and across the board loneliness crept into that as well.
Yeah.
That's pre-pandemic. So your job must be even busier now.
Yeah, the pandemic has had such a massive impact on everybody, adults, young people, but young people in particular have really, really struggled post-pandemic for a number of different reasons as well. I've noticed quite a lot of different reasons with the young people that I've been working with. So obviously you're talking about areas of low deprivation, and sometimes you can have young people who maybe don't have the kind of strongest family background or strongest family support for many, many reasons, and there's nobody who's particularly at fault for that. But they maybe don't have the strongest supportive family. So you have young people who were really, really negatively impacted by the pandemic because they were stuck at home. We were all in lockdown, and lockdown was maybe okay for you if you did have a supportive family and people that you enjoy spending time with. But if you don't have that kind of network at home, that can be really, really difficult for young people. The opposite side of that is that young people who do have supportive families spent a really, really long time in this really supportive, nurturing environment where we were all doing our best to make do and get through. And then they had to come back to school, and then they had to start interacting with people again for some young people, especially who were maybe in that, a lot of the work that I've done in my pastoral was about transitions and those transition periods from primary school into secondary school and then secondary school into, the big bad world, as it were. Those are really difficult points for young people anyway. But for a lot of young people, they missed all the support that they would get around that transition. So usually when a young person moves from primary school to secondary school, the school staff would go down to the school and they would introduce themselves and they would get to come up to the school and they would have visits and get to do things in the classrooms, and all of that stopped because of the pandemic. So they were moving up to a high school with one of the schools I worked in had primary 7 pupils, and they came to a school that had 180 first year pupils. And that's such a massive, massive thing. So if you've gone from this really small nurturing environment to this massive big environment, it can be really, really hard. And in terms of when you were asking about self-harm is a coping strategy. We all have coping strategies. Some people like to run, not me. Some people like to run. Yeah. You're one of those people, Paul. I am not one of those people. Some people like to
chasing me if I'm running.
Yeah, I might just let it get me depending on what it is, depending on the day. I'll miss the bus, I'll get the next one. But, some people like to read. Some people like to play music. Some people like to talk with their friends. Some people like to have a glass of wine, whatever your coping mechanism is. Self-harm is a coping mechanism. It's a coping strategy. And in the time of the pandemic, a lot of our coping strategies were taken away from us. We couldn't just go and see our friends. We couldn't go and talk to our guidance teacher at school. If home wasn't necessarily a safe space to have conversations. So self-harm, I think, is something that maybe quite a few people would potentially be turning to. Obviously, because of the pandemic, we don't necessarily have stats to say at this point in time. They're doing a lot of work on stats, and you'll know from your time when we worked together, working in mental health around kind of like suicide prevention and self-harm. We're still trying to gather the stats from the pandemic, because again, it's a really difficult thing to get stats about. Because if I say to you, have you ever harmed yourself? You go, me? Me? No. But that might not be the case.
Right.
And a lot of the stats that we get around self-harm are actually from hospital admissions. And a large majority, I mean this in terms of people I know personally who engage in self-harm behaviours, have never been in hospital for self-harm, have never been identified by services as people who engage in self-harm. So they're all under the radar. So the stats that we have might not be similar with all mental health stats, might not be accurately reflecting actually how many people are engaging in it.
And just in terms of, so your history with young people, was that something you drove towards out of passion, or was it something you just ended up in and it's carried on from there as a kind of a specialisation that you have?
In terms of working with young people?
Yes.
Yeah, so I always wanted to work with young people.
Did? Okay.
When I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor, I wanted to be a paediatrician, and I watched one episode of Born Every Minute and that went out the window. I also, because I cried through the entire episode and thought, I'm not going to be able to do this as a career. But I did want to study medicine when I was younger. I didn't study hard enough at school. Guys, study. If there's any young people listening to this.
Read the books.
Books, do the work. The teachers know what they're talking about. I didn't study hard enough, and I ended up going to do psychology a couple afternoons a week when I was in high school, and I got a higher in psychology, and I thought, this is amazing. I absolutely love it. I'm so interested in why people do the things that they do. Yeah. Studied psychology at uni with the end game of going on to do educational psychology, with working with young people in schools and communities.
Got it.
To go into educational psychology at the time, you had, before you could apply for the master's degree, you had to do 2 years full-time work experience, they called it, but get a job working with children and young people. And I kind of fell into a role of working with a learning disability charity, and I would go out to schools, and it was employability, so I would go out to these ASN schools, additional support needs schools, and we would do workshops on how to dress for an interview, how to write a CV, what to write in a job application, how to go for your college interviews, and I would teach young people all of these different skills. And from there, I've just kind of moved around from job to job. And after a few years, I was like, I don't want to go back to university and do educational psychology. And I've just kind of moved, I've got counselling qualifications. I'm going to do a diploma in counselling soon as well. I've just kind of moved with the times, but it's always been, I've moved away from working with young people a couple of times. I've worked with adults, and no offense, guys, I don't really like adults.
Me neither.
Young people, I'm like, yeah, that's fine.
Young
so
people
I've
and
always,
dogs.
that's it. Although they always say don't work with children or animals, but like, those are the ones
Apart
that
from
I
us,
like.
yeah.
On the self-harm side, is there, I know you talked about data being maybe not as accurate as it could be, but is there more prevalence of self-harm in younger people than there are, for example, in adults, or is it actually kind of relatively uniform throughout?
I can't really give you any like statistics on that from kind of just personal experience I've had of working with people and adults that I know in my personal life who engage in self-harm. A lot of it is a continuation into adulthood. So sometimes it starts when they're younger and it becomes this coping strategy that they use that continues into adulthood. In terms of adults who start self-harming, I'm not really sure on that. Another thing to think about as well is what we traditionally think of as self-harm. So a lot of the time people think, cutting themselves, that's what self-harm is. But there's actually a lot of different ways that you can harm yourself. And it's more about why you're doing the behaviour. So for example, if you
I always think about the iceberg, right? So you've got this tip of the iceberg and you've got the kind of ocean and then you've got this underneath of the iceberg.
Beneath,
yeah.
right?
It's all the underneath bits that are driving the behaviour, right?
Yes.
So it's maybe the educational attainment or the pressures at home or a mental health challenge or social media driving some behaviour, or all that bit stuff that's underneath that's driving the coping mechanism. So and the self-harm behaviour might be alcohol abuse, it might be smoking too much, it might be that bottle of wine that you're going home to have that society's not placing so much stigma on, but actually it escalates to become self-harm behaviour.
And it's really interesting because self-harm, I love the way you described it. For me, I think there's a lot of people, almost everyone, I think, to some extent, self-harms. So,
absolutely.
Whether that's because logically, again, we know that getting, really restful sleep is important. We know that eating the right things is important. We know that too much of anything is normally bad, food, alcohol, whatever it is. And yet, we still do it, don't we? So we're kind of self-harming, and I don't know whether it's subconscious or whether it's conscious, but optimistic. So what I mean by that is, I know this is bad for me, but I'll be all right.
It's that cognitive dissonance, isn't it? Of, you always, the classic example of cognitive dissonance is smoking, because I smoke because it makes me feel less stressed or whatever your reason is for smoking, but I also know it's bad for me. And it becomes that which side of the balance tips in the favour of the behaviour. And I think what you were talking about, Maeve, it's the understanding that iceberg.
The roots, isn't it?
Of, and we might have positive coping strategies. You might every night for a week drink half a bottle of wine when you come home from work, and then you go, actually, no, I need to stop this. I'm going to go back. I'm going to start my meditation again. I'm going to start running again, or whatever it is. If you don't have, air quotes, positive coping mechanisms to fall back on, if no one's ever taught you positive coping mechanisms, if you've never been shown how to do that, you don't have anything to fall back on. You're always going to fall back on these
unhelpful
or societally taboo coping strategies, so like drinking and things like that.
Isn't
and
the
to
challenge,
stay with you as you get to adulthood.
Isn't the challenge, though, that intervention often only happens after there's an issue?
And
actually,
it's
we
about, talked about that before, haven't we?
We talked about this earlier on, actually, about the idea that, and it's completely understandable why it happens, that what we want to do is we want to stop the self-harm behaviour. Because absolutely we do. Nobody wants to think of a person harming themselves, especially if it's somebody that you work with, if it's a family member, somebody that you love and care about.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't want to know or think about the fact that they're hurting themselves. But actually, if that's a coping strategy and we take that away from them and they don't have another coping strategy, what do they do? How do they cope with these overwhelming feelings that they're feeling? So that's why we were talking about this, the sort of harm minimization or the harm reduction models. People might be more familiar with it in terms of like needle exchanges and, clean rooms and things where people can go and safely take drugs. That's a form of harm minimization or harm reduction. It's the idea that stopping you from taking drugs is not the main issue right now. We need to get to the root of why you started taking drugs and why you use that as a coping
Yeah, love
mechanism,
that, yeah.
Yep.
how that's functioning for you. So we're going to minimize the risk to yourself by providing you with safe needles. We're going to provide you a space where you can come and take drugs safely, where you'll be looked
Until we
after.
can get to the root of why.
Yes.
How does that behaviour benefit you?
Yeah, exactly.
So trauma-informed.
Yeah, trauma-informed practice is absolutely where we need to go with self-harm as well. So it's that, we talked about this, the kind of convergence of trauma-informed practice and harm minimisation of eventually, hopefully, the aim is that they will converge together and the person will get to a point where they are at a point of recovery that works for them. In terms of how they use self-harm. And I think, again, that's really important in terms of if we're being recovery focused, recovery looks different for everyone. So not everybody will stop drinking alcohol completely if that's their coping mechanism. But can we get them to a point where they are able to minimise the risk, where they're able to minimise the risk of their alcohol intake and behaviours that might come from that?
And that's a really interesting thing for us as a digital health technology company, because recovery is an aspirational point maybe for us, but actually the other end of the scale for us is prevention.
Yep.
And what does prevention look like for us in this kind of digital world, especially with children and young people, who are maybe learning these coping strategies around self-harm, which you're right, might not be cutting or burning or any of these behaviours, but in a kind of social media driven, technology driven world that we're very, very aware of and conscious of as a digital technology company. We don't want to be prescriptive. We definitely don't want to be that. We're always looking at how we can work alongside children and young people.
Yep.
At some point in our journey. But we want to be a preventative tool.
Yeah.
But it's that recovery looks different for everyone, doesn't it? We're also looking at the 3 and 4. People who are not having mental health challenges, but they would be in our preventative category.
Absolutely.
So I guess the question is, what does prevention look like for someone who maybe is maybe having a kind of pre-coping? Does that make sense? A pre-coping strategy?
Yeah, absolutely.
But with a digital technology in mind.
Just when you were saying that, I was thinking about your app, because I've got the kind of it's like, I would say the beta version. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but and I've been using it, and what I really like about it, and one thing that we've talked a lot about, Maeve and I, in terms of our past roles, is one thing that I think is, I don't want to say lacking, but something that we definitely think could be working more on as a society is on emotional literacy.
Yes.
In terms of so many young people, and therefore adults as well, don't actually understand how they feel. They can't necessarily identify their emotions. So a lot of the time when I'm talking to young people about their self-harm behaviours, as an example, and you say, and how do you feel? And they don't actually know. They just know that the self-harm makes them feel better. They don't know why they need the self-harm. They can't necessarily pinpoint that. So I think in terms of prevention, your app is really good because it makes you think about, how do I feel right now? Where am I when I feel that? And we were talking about that, like tracking, like I always feel really crap when I'm at work. Or I always feel really rubbish when I'm at home, but I feel really great when I'm out having coffee with my friends. And that being able to actually maybe just start to build a picture of when do I feel good and when do I not feel good, and be able to actually start to identify the emotions that you're feeling as well.
Because we talked about the neurochemical change that goes on for young people. When you're 14, 15, the brain actually prunes itself. It actually starts to peel back, for want of a better word. But, and those kind of that dose hormone exchange, so dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins that kind of change in the brain for young people. So that emotional literacy is really, really important for young people to start to get to know and kind of make a connection with.
And it's self-awareness, I think, because nobody, not nobody, people rarely stop and just think and self-reflect and have some introspection. It's all going off everywhere around them. The noise is deafening. All of our senses are overwhelmed. How do you make sense of that? Let alone figure out who you are and what you're about, and So the very first bit that I think we're trying to achieve is to help people grab hold of a branch and just take a moment, right? The whole moment capture for us is critical because it's cathartic in a way, or it could be cathartic by just documenting it, I guess, and capturing it. You're having to think, you're having to connect with yourself, and you assume that mind and body are in the same place all the time. When you look at folk walking around the streets, they're not. They're not. And so we're trying to kind of join those back together, because only when there's some sense of self-awareness and joining the dots and the connections about why do I feel that way when I'm with that person, or why do I feel so good when I'm over here and in that place, I think that's the beginning of the journey.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that schools, I've noticed, are definitely trying to work on from a much younger age now as well, because, and again, if you don't have anyone who can tell you that, and again, we've come from generations of people in the west of Scotland who don't talk about our feelings. Nobody in my house was going to teach me to meditate, and that's not, and to like settle my feelings, and that's not anything against my parents. It's just not a thing that they did.
Yeah, same.
So now that I've learned that, I can pass that on to any children that I have or any young people I work with, but not everybody has those kind of influences in their life. So it's about how do we start to influence young people so that we can have a kind of mentally healthier next generation of people, so that they do know how to identify how they're feeling, and again, starting when they're in nursery school and primary school, and really carrying that all the way through, so that hopefully by the time, I mean, the statistics show that, like a quarter of all young people experience, or a quarter of all people who experience mental health problems starts before the age of 17.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if we can, like you say, it's preventative, and I think that's something that the government's really getting on board with as well, because for a long time we've been putting a lot of money into crisis intervention.
Yes.
And that's great and is very needed. However, actually, we can stem the flow of the need for crisis intervention if we start with prevention, and we start getting
that
younger.
iceberg analysis again, isn't
Yep.
it? I wanted to circle back just to something you said there about influence. So, we're influenced by our parents, at the kind of very first level, people in our homes, brothers, sisters, who are maybe older or even younger, aunts, uncles, that kind of, first influence. But children and young people in particular are so influenced by much more. And I think it's Johann Hari who wrote the book Lost Connections. He talks about these bridges from our brains now that are connected to, all this outside world. So it's not just our brain's chemistry that's changing us and how we feel now. It's all this kind of outside, dynamic world now. But it's not how he even viewed the world in the 1990s when he wrote, I think, the book. He talks about, economic things and educational things, but now it's social media.
Yeah.
Now it's what our friends say at the football team, or the the gymnastics club, or the roller derby, or whatever they're involved in now, or going to the coffee shop with your friends, or there was a big BBC documentary about the kind of nude photographs of kids being passed around schools, and it's really horrific things.
Yeah.
And I can remember, I think we spoke about it briefly, about a young girl getting hit with a pastry that got made at home economics class on the bus, and that was her nickname for the whole of the school. I mean, and that's a horrendous thing for me to think back on, because she never shook that. She never shook that our whole school journey, and probably didn't shake it her whole adult journey either. But I remember her bursting into tears on the school bus because she was so humiliated. And now when I think of anything you put on the internet stays on the internet.
Yep.
And now I think about all those, sort of what you're exposed to, and I think about all the influences that are around for young people. How do they manage that in regards to mental health and loneliness and isolation and self-harm?
They don't.
Yeah, I'm just wondering the pressure that.
Yeah, I have a lot of conflicting feelings about social media. I have friends all around the world, and it's so amazing that I can see what my friends in the US and Australia and all this are doing with their lives. But like you say, communities are so much bigger now. So when I was at school, I knew the people that went to the school that I went to. And maybe if I went to a club in my local town that some other kids from other schools went to, I might know a few other people from another school. Kids nowadays know every young person in a 50-mile radius because they add them all on Snapchat, and it's so-and-so's cousin who goes to this school, and they're
and TikTok and all that
TikTok and all this kind of stuff. And we talked about a similar situation where this news follows you. If you move to a school, any other school in Scotland, a young person from your school could potentially contact someone in your new school and tell them everything about you.
Why you've moved.
Why have you moved? Because something's happened. Was there bullying? Was there this? Did something embarrassing happen to you on the school bus? Everybody knows because they can just find out. Or you're going to, Inverurie Academy in Aberdeen now, so I'm going to contact this person that says on their bio that they go to Inverurie Academy. I'm going to contact them and I'm going to tell them that you're known as X because of this thing that happened to you. And it follows them around everywhere. Back in the day, I say, if you were getting bullied at school, it stopped at 3:30 and it didn't happen at the weekends. They're now in your bedroom, they're in your pocket.
Yeah.
And they're inviting you into group chats and they're saying horrible things about you, and you remove yourself, but you just get invited into another one and you see all these horrible things. And it is so isolating, which is completely the opposite of what social media is supposed to do. It's supposed to encourage us to be more social with each other, but it can be so isolating for young people because it's a lot easier to be targeted as well. And not even to mention all the stuff that they're seeing online that they're trying to aspire to be, all the celebrities who are posting their beach bodies and, oh, well, I can't eat lunch now because I'm too fat, or I'm too this, or I'm too the next thing, because they're aspiring to things that are not real because they Photoshop all these pictures and they're not real, and they don't actually own that Maserati that they're sitting on top of. That belongs to someone else who lives in the street and they've just taken a quick picture in front of it. Somebody sent them all of those clothes. They don't buy all those clothes themselves. But for young people, as you were saying, their neural pathways are rewriting themselves. They're learning who they are. They're trying to figure out their place in the world, and that's not always apparent to them. That these things are not as they seem.
And I suppose if you think about it, for every like they get, it's a dopamine hit, isn't it?
I've got young
that kind
people,
of addictive shoot. Maybe that's a bit controversial, but it is a kind of shot of dopamine, that kind of addictive.
There's young people I know who will delete a picture off Facebook or Instagram if it doesn't get a certain number of likes.
Wow, really?
Because their self-esteem is now tied to the amount of likes that they get on a certain post.
So I find this I find this quite overwhelming, actually. And when you think about the size of this problem, because I think it's a problem, when you think about the size of it, it's overwhelming to me because I'm really struggling to figure out how you tackle it. And all I want to do is reach out to these people, these young people who are struggling, and reassure them that that's not life, right? That's not life and they're okay. And of course, there's so many instances across the globe, let alone on a country or a town level. There's so many instances. So I just wondered what your feeling was on how we start to change it. Because if I'm looking at it, okay, change has happened relatively quickly, right? We're talking a couple of decades, really. And it's been astronomical change of technology. And we know that anything can be used for good or bad. And technology is one of those things. But society, governments, people are struggling to keep pace with that speed and acceleration of change, and we can see it playing out on how it's impacting younger people. So, what I naturally, my kind of shooting from the hip thing is, we've got to get it into schools. We've got to get it, we've got to get it early. We've got to have some form of framework that reaches out to mass amounts of the population and re-educates really quick, hard and fast, because there's terrible stuff going on out there. And the pastry thing is an example, right? People might roll their eyes on that as just a pastry. To that girl, it's horrific.
Absolutely.
And
you can say, people will forget about it in 10 years. 10 years to a young person is
a lifetime.
Because
right?
they can't, again, because their brains are rewriting themselves, they actually can't think that far. They can't see the consequences of their actions. And that's from both the young person that's happened to and also the young people who are doing it as well. They can't actually see the consequence of their actions. But I agree with you, education is the way forward. Like roles that Maeve and I used to have, where we were in schools, we were engaging with young people, we were building those relationships, and we're talking to them about mental health, about how other people are affected by it. I think also peer education is really, really important. Yep. It's something that the last school that I worked in, it was something that we talked a lot about in terms of the way that young people talk to each other sometimes, and the language they use is horrible sometimes. And again, they don't understand the impact of their words. How do we make them understand the impact of their words? How can we get young people who've maybe experienced certain things in their life we don't want to cause any trauma in anyone's life, but we also kind of, I think, sometimes need to be realistic of when you say these things, do you actually know what that means? Because so many young people say phrases and you go, what does that mean? And they go, I don't know.
And that goes back to the emotional literacy education, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I think, we need to be getting in, from nursery school and teaching kids about emotional literacy and how we interact with each other and all these sorts of things, and how we can just be kind to each other and understanding what other people are going through and how we can interact with them in a way that is going to be supportive as well.
It's just thinking and having some, it sounds basic, but some respect. And what you were talking about is once it's out on the internet, it's on the internet, right?
Absolutely.
And lives change, people change. But I wonder whether there's some linkage here that explains to young people that once they say something to somebody, it sticks. It's like posting something on the internet. It is there forever. And when you say something to somebody, it can impact them forever.
There's a couple of really good exercises you can do with young people on this. One of them that one of my friends did with a group of young people was she gave them all individual, because she had issues with this group of young people saying nasty things to each other. She gave them all an individual tube of glitter, different colours, and she got them to pour them into a tub, mixed all together. And then she went, Paul, get your glitter back out and put it in your jar. And they were like, what? And she was like, I want you to fill your jar back up with your blue glitter that you had. Oh, I can't do that. And that's what she said. When you say things to people, you cannot take it back. I've seen it done with like toothpaste. That's really messy. I've seen it done with like shaving foam and stuff. Or like, crumple up a bit of paper, right? Get that piece of paper completely smooth again. You can't. And that's the whole idea that once you've said something to someone, you cannot take that back, and it will affect that person in ways that you might not even be able to see. So it's about, and I think that's what I enjoyed about my last role, was being able to go in and do these lessons in creative ways. I like to put spins on things, create games that are going to stick in the young people's minds.
Visualise it.
They can visualise what we're doing. Like we talked about the Knights and Dragons game. So you move around the room and you pick a person in the room and they have to be your dragon. Okay. You don't tell anybody who your dragon is, and you have to try and move away from them. But they also have a dragon in the room. So they're moving to get away from their dragon, and you have to try and stay away. And in the second round, you do the same, but you pick someone else to be your knight, and you have to keep your knight in between you and your dragon. And you can do it for loads of different things. I do it when I'm talking about self-care. So your dragon is the things that stress you out. And sometimes it feels like there's a fire-breathing dragon chasing you. Yep. So what you need is a knight. You need something to be in between you and the stress. So that could be going out with your pals, playing football. You can do it for conflict management. You can do it for all sorts of things. But having these kind of games sticks with the young people. It gets in their brain. And then they go, oh, remember that Knights and Dragons game? Remember that Knights and Dragons game that we played? And you go, why did we play that game? What was it? Oh, the dragon was the things that annoy us or stress us out, and the knight was protecting us. Yeah, and then it stuck in their brain.
Really good.
Yeah. So really, Louise and I just played games
pretty
for 2 years.
Sounds like a great gig.
Make a pom-pom worry monster to tell all your worries to, all these sorts.
We did that
but the kids come in. I used to have a jar on my desk. It was called Jim, the worry jar, and the idea that you would get all the kids to write worries down, and they would all pile them in the jar. And obviously, the jar is too small for the amount of kids you have, and it overflows. What happens when our internal worry jars overflow? That's when we have the eruptions. That's when we have that. So, and kids would come in and go, can we see Jim? Can we put worries in Jim? And things like that. And it just sticks in their brains, and it gets them something to think about. And, maybe when they're older, they might think, oh, I remember my worry jar's getting a wee bit full. And it's just about trying to put that little seed into their brain.
It made me feel better now.
Good.
It made me feel better.
So, Jim, your worry jar is not overflowing.
So I guess that's actually quite a nice segue. So you're going into a new role.
Yes.
You're working with pretty much around the country. Sort of specialising, being an expert on self-harm. And I wonder, what is your concern? What is your biggest anxiety about taking on this new role, working with children and young people, working with their parents, carers, frontline staff. And I guess the two consistent things we've touched on is digital technology is kind of here to stay. It's going to get bigger. It's accelerating, if anything. And also mental health, we're kind of in a pandemic, epidemic. And I think that's really here to stay. We look at CAM statistics, we look at all the sort of third sector mental health charities are really fighting, bursting at the seams with referrals. What are your concerns going into your new role, focusing on self-harm?
That's actually kind of why I wanted to go for this role when I saw it. So I've been working with children and young people and their families for a long time now, and it's always been kind of individual or small group work based. So, maybe a classroom. The school I used to work in, I worked in the whole learning community, so I worked with all of their connected primary schools. So you're talking maybe like 180 kids in terms of the first year enrolment, and then odd kids throughout the school and the staff. And that's excellent. And I feel personally that I did some really great work in that learning community. That's one learning community. And I was talking to parents about self-harm and explaining, we've had conversations with parents about self-harm. And again, that's one parent that you're giving that support to. And that's great. And that's so helpful for that one individual. But I was just like, this needs to be so much bigger. This needs to be so much bigger. Yeah. So when this kind of role came up to work on a kind of national level in terms of self-harm, I was like, I think my concern is that my new boss is going to be like, you need to slow down, because I have so many ideas of how we can spread this across Scotland. Yeah. But, and I've talked to you about some of them, Maeve, and you're going to give me all your contacts so I can make it happen. I might just need to have like a phased plan of how I'm going to do it. But that's why I wanted to move into this role, because I was like, we need to have a national approach to mental health. It can't just be individuals going into individual groups and talking to them about mental health. We need to have a strategy where everybody learns about what mental health is, because we're not going to move on. Self-harm is such a taboo subject. It's so socially unacceptable in many ways. To engage in self-harm and to actively say that you're self-harming, that is unhelpful, because people can't get the support they need because they're too scared to speak up. And it's the same for all mental health and all mental health conditions as well. People are too scared to say, I'm having a bit of a rubbish day. Actually, we just say fine. Fine is a great Scottish word. Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah. But what does fine mean? It can mean anything from excellent to actually the depths of despair. We need to have like a national approach, I think, and that's why I'm so excited about this role, to be able to go out and actually reach more people. And I'll hopefully be training up other people to train other people, so it won't just be me on my own traveling around Scotland delivering training to people. We'll hopefully develop this network of trainers who can cover the whole country, and then everybody can learn every school can learn what self-harm is, and every school can know how to support someone as best they can.
Once you train the trainers though, what happens to the tour bus?
You just met my face on the side of a bus, like
you understood sponsors.
I think it's fantastic, and it really gives me hope again, that, because you're absolutely right, couldn't agree more. The impact that you can have in a small social group is phenomenal, because it's focused.
Yep.
But it is only a really small group. So the fact that you're excited about scale and a greater, wider impact, and you're right about education being around this topic being more prevalent. So hugely excited about it. Really excited on your behalf.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And the Scottish Government are working on a new self-harm strategy just now, which is really, really exciting. Because that will influence as well how the media puts across stats of self-harm, how because currently a lot of self-harm stats are linked to suicide stats, in terms of the idea that if people who have died by suicide if you engage in self-harm, you're 100 times more likely to die by suicide. I'm saying that as a stat that has been put across that is potentially not true.
Not correct.
Because again, these stats are quite often taken from attempted suicides or, deaths by suicide. Or that person also self-harmed. So it's kind of an almost backwards correlation.
Yeah.
But that statistic is terrifying if you're a parent or a person who's engaging with somebody who self-harms. So your young person comes home from in the school phone you and say they've been engaging in self-harm, and you've just read online that they're 100 times more likely to die by suicide. That's absolutely terrifying.
It's not always the case, right?
It's not, and that's why we need to be very careful, and that's why I think this government strategy is going to be so helpful in terms of giving people the accurate information and also giving them accurate ways that they can support people, so that it shouldn't just be specialised support that you can get for self-harm. You should be able to talk to anybody about it, and they'll know kind of strategies that they can use to help you.
Yeah. Well, I am really hopeful that the strategy does actually give people hope, and give people some sort of valuable information in helping their loved ones, reduce harm, harm minimization, as you were talking about earlier on, and find a recovery plan for their loved ones that isn't just broad brush and is unique to them.
Yeah, and it's difficult. Like, I'm not sitting here going, oh, just let people harm themselves. Like, as a person who has people in their life that they love who engage in self-harm, it is very difficult to be like, I'm just going to let you do that. Just come to me when you're ready. I fully understand how difficult that approach is, but if we're all in it together, then that's what's going to make the big difference. When you have the support from when you're a parent and you can go and get support from other parents who are engaging, who are experiencing the same things, from organisations who know how to properly support you, that's when it's going to work as a whole.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. I think if we're all in it together, we can move mountains. Yeah.
Right? Campaign slogan for the side of the two of us.
You understood. All in it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Love it.
Thanks so much, Louise, for joining us, and good luck in the new role.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you.